Greetings from Chicagoland. This is Munira from Chicago, and I am the CEO and founder of Kismet Ventures Inc. I am also a John Maxwell certified coach, and I have a segment on YouTube that says Munira's Musings, and you can find that under my name, Munira Zahabi. And I am on the mission right now to find people who are instilling values in other people. So I find them, I expose them and promote them on my show, as people are now calling it. So this is a good thing. And this is the Munira Zahabi show. And so I have a guest today, and his name is Joel Hawbaker. Hawbaker. Am I right?
Yes, ma'am. Hawbaker. I'm laughing because I think every interview I've had so far, the person interviewing me has struggled to get the name right the first time, so don't feel bad.
Okay. I'm sorry about that.
That's okay.
Joel Hawbaker.
Yes, ma'am.
Tell me, Joel, where are you from, and tell us a little bit about yourself.
Certainly. I am from and currently still living in north central Alabama, not far from Birmingham.
Okay.
And in my day job, I am a high school history and Bible teacher, and I also I coach high school soccer as well. And about a year ago, I started writing and speaking, focusing mainly on the topics of leadership and education.
Oh, okay.
So those are the things that I do.
So that's your night job?
Yes, ma'am. That's kind of what I do, and what free time I have, that's what I spend a lot of it doing.
Okay, so tell me how you started as a teacher, and why do you teach Bible?
Certainly. Well, I got started. It's funny. I got started as a teacher because I realized I didn't want to become a lawyer. I went to college, and I chose my major. I majored in history, and I chose my major by avoiding the classes I didn't want to take. So I didn't want to take any math. I took a college math class while I was still in high school. And I got to college, and I said, what can I major in and never take math again? Not because I'm not good at it, I just don't like doing it. And I went to a small private Christian college, and they said, well, if you don't want to take any math at all, we only have a couple different majors to choose from. We have English and we have history. And I said, I don't really do poetry either, so let's try history. And I fell in love with it. I had 3 brilliant history professors. They were excellent storytellers. And in the time that I was with them, I realized that what I wanted to do with my life was not go to law school, but what I wanted to do was to do what they had done for me, which was to teach me to love history by telling it like a story. And so that's what I do. I teach history and I teach Bible, and I do that. I teach at a small Christian high school. And so I get to spend my day talking about topics and ideas that I love with kids who probably don't love them as much as I do. But that's okay, because my goal is to get them to love it more. That's one of the things that I really enjoy, is getting to help kids who maybe don't love history learn to love it, or get kids who really hate history to hate it a little bit less and at least see why it matters. And so those things are a lot of fun for me.
Okay, so history is a broad subject, right?
Yes, ma'am.
It's a very broad subject. So
it is.
How far in time do you go? What age of students do you teach, and what history do you teach? Is it American history or?
I actually teach 2 different classes. One is American history, and it's the first half. So I basically teach before Christopher Columbus all the way up through Reconstruction following the American Civil War. So that's one class. The other class I teach is world history, and it's the second half. So I teach from around the end of the Middle Ages, around the year 1500, around the Protestant Reformation, all the way up through yesterday. And again, like you mentioned, it's a very broad topic, so we can't cover everything in detail. There's just not enough time to cover 500 years of history in one semester. You can't possibly learn all the details. So what I try to do is to teach students to look for patterns. I try to teach them to look for themes of history, and I try to teach them the importance of the ideas behind the major occurrences. Again, there's not enough time to learn the date of every single important thing that happened. Plus, with every kid that has a smartphone, they can look that stuff up on Wikipedia. What I need to teach them is the why behind the events. I need to teach them why it matters, and I need to teach them the connections between ideas and events. And so after having done that, I've been teaching now for 11 years. And I teach high school kids, ninth and 10th graders mostly. And so having done that for the past decade, it really caused me to realize that the other thing I want is to help teach kids to see that history matters a lot more than any test you're going to take. If the only reason you study history is to pass a test, you've wasted your time. History matters because it influences everything. It influences the city you live in. Your city has a history, good or bad or both probably. And the reason things are the way they are where you live is because of its history. So I live in a small town in Alabama, and my town has a history that is not good, especially of racism, segregation and slavery and that kind of stuff. And so my job then is to live in this place and try to change its history for the better. It's to try to make where I live a little bit better. And that's one of the things I talk about in my book. It's one of the things I talk about in my speeches about leadership, is that my job is not to change the entire world. My job is to change the little pocket of the world I live in. And if that also changes the whole world, that's great. But what I need to focus on is changing the area where I am and making a difference in my little neighborhood. And if I do that, and if everybody I speak to does that, then we can make a huge change. I'm probably never going to be president. I'm probably never going to be prime minister of any country. What I can do is I can be a good citizen in the place where I live. And if I do those things well, and I teach others to do that well, now we've made a huge difference.
So where did this stem from? It seems you're very passionate about being a good citizen. So where did it stem from?
Well, a lot of that comes from my parents. Both my parents, my mom and dad, were in the military. Mom was in the Army Reserves for 10 years, and dad was an active duty officer for 20 years. He was drafted into the Army during the Vietnam War, right after he graduated college. So he spent about 18 months in Vietnam. He saw combat and won a lot of medals, and he stayed in the military. He went 82nd Airborne and Army Ranger. For those that are familiar with the military, those are pretty impressive accomplishments. He retired as a lieutenant colonel, and both of them taught me the value of taking care of the place where you are. They both taught me the value of trying to leave places better than they were when you got there. And so a lot of it comes from that, but a lot of it also comes from my religious background, my faith. I was raised in church, and I'm a Christian today. I went to a Christian high school, went to a Christian college, and I believe that the gospel applies in every area of life. And so that means if I'm going to live out what I believe, I don't need to just be a Christian on Sunday morning when I'm sitting in church. It means I need to be a Christian every day. And that means I need to treat people well. It means I need to relate well to my wife and to my kids and to my students and my soccer players. It means I need to relate well to my ex-wife and her husband and their child. And if I'm doing that consistently, that means I'm living out my faith. And when I fail to do that, that means I need to go back and ask forgiveness, because that's also part of what Christianity teaches me. And so all of those things come together in how I talk about leadership, because the idea is to think of leadership as serving other people, providing value for other people, positively influencing other people to help them become better versions of themselves. To me, that's what leadership is. And again, that example comes from Christ. He came to earth not to be served. He came to earth to forgive our sins by suffering himself. He came to wash his disciples' feet. Well, that's very different than the way most leaders today do it. Most leaders today are in it for themselves. So as a soccer coach, am I trying to win games to win glory for myself? Or am I trying to teach my soccer players to be better people? Well, those are very different ideas, you know. If I'm only trying to win soccer games, I'm going to coach differently than if I'm trying to teach my soccer players to be good people. And so I believe my task is the second. That is, it's to teach my players to be better people, because they're going to be people a lot longer than they're going to be soccer players.
You're so right. You're so right, because those are the things that we don't teach our children. And I was looking at the book you shared with me.
Yes, ma'am.
And I saw that, and there was one thing that really reached out to me. Of course, I can't find it right now, but it said that we're not teaching our students, our people, our young folks they're not getting the education we want them to get,
right,
or obtain in the classrooms.
Right.
So as an author, you have this point in your book. How are you changing that for everybody else?
Yeah, so, well, what that means is, and I'm blessed to teach in a private school because it means I don't have to worry as much about the end-of-year standardized tests that a lot of public schools do. I believe that standardized tests serve a good purpose. They try to measure at least part of what students have learned, and that's okay. That's not a bad thing, but it's like a lot of things throughout history that were well-intended but poorly executed. And in the book, I gave a couple of other examples of that sort of stuff because standardized tests are meant to measure important things like what has a kid learned. But the problem is what you can actually measure in a standardized test is limited because it's all multiple choice or essays. Well, that means you're limited in what you can see. So what I try to do is instead, and again, I still teach my history classes and I still keep very high academic standards. You can ask my students. My class is one of the harder ones in the high school. They don't like all the essays they have to write. They don't like all the notes they have to take. But in addition to teaching the subject matter of history, what I try to teach students is values. I want to teach them to pursue things like virtue. I want them to become more virtuous when they leave than they were when they came in. I want them to learn courage, and I want them to learn the value of honesty even when honesty is hard. And those are things that you can't measure with a standardized test. Those are things that it's really hard to measure in an essay. And so that means I have a lot of conversations in the classroom with my students. We talk a lot about why history matters. And one of the reasons is to study great examples from the past and look at what great people have done, whether those are famous great people that you'd normally find in a history book, or whether those are great people in your own family that maybe you should just ask your parents to tell you more stories about. And so in my classroom, I try to teach kids that what we're there to do is to learn things like fortitude and justice and temperance. We're there to learn how to have better, we're there to learn faith and hope and love. We're not there just to learn to memorize the names of all the presidents. We're not there just to memorize the dates of all the different battles of World War II. Like, that stuff's important, but it's not going to help you be a better person to have memorized a lot of dates. It will be a better person if you've learned why courage matters. And so those are the kind of things I try to focus on.
So that's awesome because these instillments of value, you know, that you do, even drop by drop, they may not get it right now, but as they get older, they'll realize how much they've learned. You know, it's like, you know, how babies learn. You know, you tell them stuff and they don't, and then all of a sudden they babble what they want.
Absolutely.
So, and I love history too. I love it, you know, and I'm not a very, I'm not a buff. Like, I don't need to know, I don't know everything. Right. But I love the fact that, you know, that I learn from history, and even, you know, when we go back in our lives, that's history too. Right. And we can shape our future by not making those mistakes or learning from our mistakes.
Absolutely. Right? Yeah, absolutely. And you mentioned something in there that I think is interesting, and that is I am amazed at the number of parents I meet who didn't like history when they were in school and who learned to like it after they got out of school. And they say, oh, I wish I had learned more. And what that tells me is that history was taught to them poorly. Because if they like history now, what that means is it's interesting to them, but it wasn't when they were younger. Well, that to me says that maybe perhaps they weren't taught it as well as they might have been. And again, part of that is because a lot of history teachers like me are also coaches. And so a lot of times coaches don't spend as much time teaching their classes as they do focusing on their sport that they're coaching. And so one of the things I try to do differently is to teach people in a way that keeps them interested in the subject. And so that's an entertaining challenge to try to meet as well with, again, kids that have cell phones, kids that can get on YouTube and watch videos about stuff. How do I keep history interesting to them? Well, the answer is to turn it into stories, and turn it into stories that still matter in their personal lives.
I would love to sit in one of your classrooms to listen to that, because, that's interesting. I mean, there's so many things, even when we go to church and we're teaching children about history, so that
Right.
you can, I mean, everything is a history. Like I said, it
Right.
shapes the future. And most of them are just, people are not interested. But like you said, if I had a teacher who was, I mean, I learned history the hard way. You were supposed to remember the dates.
Yep.
Like,
You memorize it and you spit it back out.
yes, but the thing is that I just had an interest, because it made me wonder in awe about how those people lived. My favorite history is the Greek history, and how.
Oh yeah, I love classical history. Ancient Greece and Rome is great, isn't it?
And when I was in school, we learned China, we learned Russia, we learned because I grew up in Africa, right?
Okay.
Those worlds were also important. India was one of them.
Oh, sure.
States was another.
Right.
So all of this history came together, and then finally, when everything came together, it made a lot of sense. It's like, so I think that the way you teach it is more important. But many, and like you said, most people feel that history is a very boring subject. Why am I supposed to learn about it?
Yes.
And I feel, and I've always felt, because I taught history. I used to be a teacher back home, and I taught history, the way. So I used to sit on the table and just narrate from memory, not read a book or anything.
Right.
I used to see the kids were just, oh my God, did that happen?
Right.
Because my famous thing was when I was this was in Tanzania, where I lived and taught.
Okay.
They had, they had a rebellion called the Maji Maji Rebellion.
Okay.
And the warriors there they had the shamans there, and they worked on this magic that if the bullets came to them, they would turn into water.
Ah.
So it was called Maji Maji, because Maji is water in Swahili.
Okay.
It was such a wonderful concept that people were like, the kids were just wrapped in awe, and they were like, did that really happen? And I don't know if it really happened, but that story means a lot of things, because it reminded me of the history and the faith that people had in the shamans, right? So I love the fact that you're instilling these values, but also teaching them courage and sustaining them, because they learn so much.
Right. Well, I hope so. And again, I'm blessed to get to do that in my Bible classes as well. I teach a lot of different books in different semesters, but one book that I've taught a bunch of times is by C.S. Lewis. It's called Mere Christianity. And in that book, he has a couple different chapters where he talks about different virtues. He has a whole chapter where he talks about virtues like temperance, which is doing the right thing at the right time to the right degree. It doesn't mean not drinking alcohol. That's what it means in American culture. But the word temperance really means just doing the right thing at the right time to the right degree. It means not going overboard. And well, that's a great thing to learn. And he says you can be intemperate about playing cards as much as you can be intemperate about alcohol. And so whatever you're doing, if you're doing it too much, if you're doing it to the detriment of your family, that's being intemperate. And so we need to learn that, especially as kids growing up in the technology age. They need to learn the value of temperance when it comes to things like being on their phone or playing video games. They need to learn justice. The golden rule: treat other people the way you want to be treated. They need to learn fortitude, which is another word for kind of courage. And again, we don't have classes in virtues in the high school. It'd be kind of cool if we did. But we have classes in everything else. And so that means if they're not seeing those virtues lived out, they're not going to learn them. And C.S. Lewis wrote another great book called The Abolition of Man, and it was basically a criticism of education in England during his lifetime, because what was happening is the same thing that's happening in America today, where schools are focusing so much on the content, they've taken away the focus on values. And C.S. Lewis says you can't have one without the other. You can't teach people that they should be good people without giving them a reason why. He says it's creating men without chests, and what he means by that is men without heart. He said if you don't have value, you can't expect people to have courage if you don't teach them why courage matters. You can't tell someone to go and be virtuous without showing them why virtue matters. And I think he makes a really good point there, that if we're going to teach our students that they need to become good people, we need to explain to them why it's important to be good people. And that goes back to the virtues. And for me as a Christian, that goes back to my faith. That goes back to Christianity. Why should we be good people? Because I saw this quote the other day. I've never seen anyone argued into Christianity. I've seen lots of people loved into Christianity. I've seen lots of people loved into the church. I don't know very many people who became a Christian because they were argued into it logically or philosophically. And so what that means, we need to teach people to be good people because we need to show them that kind of love. The love that Christ has showed us, that's what we need to show other people as well. Especially people that we think don't deserve it, because I don't deserve it. I know that I know my own heart. I know my own sin. I know the mistakes I've made in my past. I don't deserve love and forgiveness, but I've received it anyway. And so that means I need to show it to other people. I need to show it to my wife, and I need to show it to my kids. I need to show it to my students. And that's a very humbling thing. And so that's something I talk about in my book as well. It's the concept of leadership that I call confident humility. And it sounds like a paradox because it sounds like those two things ought to be opposites. But I don't think that they are. I think people misunderstand those words. For example, when people talk about the word confident, a lot of times they don't know the difference between confidence and arrogance. So for example, if I were to ask you, are you a good history teacher, or were you a good history teacher? If you say, well, yeah, of course I was, people might say, well, that sounds arrogant.
Yes.
But that's not true. If you were good at it, to say that you were good at it isn't arrogant. It's knowing that you were good. That's okay. And so for me, the line between confidence and arrogance is when you start comparing yourself to other people. If I say to you, are you a good history teacher? And you say, well, I'm a better teacher than you are. Well, now we've become arrogant. Does that make sense? When we start comparing ourselves to other people. Confidence is simply being sure of what you know. That's all. And so for me, what that means is I need to be sure that I know what my talents are. And then the humility, people misunderstand that too. People think humility is pretending you're not good at something. So if you were to ask a CEO of a business, are you a good business person? And they say, well, no, not really. He said, well, then how did you get to be CEO? That's not humility. That's lying. That's dishonesty. You know what I mean? So C.S. Lewis tells us humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's not a pretty girl pretending she's ugly. It's not a smart person pretending he's stupid. Humility isn't thinking less of yourself. It's just thinking of yourself less often. And so confident humility, when you put those together, confident humility is taking what you know you're good at and using it to serve other people instead of yourself. That's all it is. And if we lead that way, we can make a tremendous impact on other people, because now I'm not concerned about how it makes me look. So as a soccer coach, I don't care if people think I'm a good coach or not. What I care about is, am I helping my soccer players become better people and better at soccer? If I'm doing that, other people's opinion about me doesn't matter, because I'm not doing it to try to impress them. I'm doing it because it's the right thing to do. And if they think I'm good at it, that's fine. That makes my job easier. If they think I'm bad at it, that's okay too, because I'm not there to impress them. And I don't mean that arrogantly. I don't mean that rude, like, oh, their opinion's not important. But ultimately, my aim is not to impress parents. My aim is to impact my players. If I'm doing that, and this is another thing I teach, if I'm creating good relationships, the results will take care of themselves, because my players will work hard. And if they work hard, we're going to be good. And so we will win games, so I don't have to worry about the success. If I'm doing the right thing, the success will follow.
You speak about a lot of things that make sense. You do, because people don't think about it that way,
Right. Well, and that's exactly what you said. That's the problem, is a lot of people don't necessarily take the time to think it all the way through. And part of that is because we've been conditioned to have a very short attention span. And so we simply don't think these things all the way through. We just think, here's what I want right now, so I'm going to go after it. And I'm going to go after it in the way that is most convenient. Well, a lot of times what's convenient isn't what's smart. What's convenient isn't what's good. And a basic way to talk about that is just, I give the example in my history classes of food. I ask the kids, because again, I live in Alabama, and we like to pride ourselves on being able to grill out and barbecue stuff and cook on the grill really well. And so I ask my kids, say, how many of you can make a better hamburger than you would get at McDonald's? How many of you at home, you can make a better hamburger? Oh, yeah, of course I can. I'm really good at that. I say, then why don't you? How come McDonald's is making billions of dollars and you're not? And the answer is convenience. Because it's easier to go through the drive-thru than it is to go to the store, pick up the ingredients, make it ourselves. Well, that also means it's going to be probably a lot less healthy. True. And so what's convenient for us isn't necessarily best for us. And that's true in all areas of life, you know. It might be convenient for me to drive 80 miles down the road through a school zone early in the morning because I got to get where I'm going. That's not a good idea.
That's true. You're right.
So, so we have to be willing to have enough self-awareness and self-discipline to give up what is convenient for the sake of what is better. We have to give up what is convenient right now for the sake of what's better in the long run. And again, my faith plays a big part in that because as a Christian, I'm taught and I believe that my job is not to live for the sake of this earth. My job is to live for eternity. It's to make an impact that will last beyond my death. Well, how do I do that? By pointing people to something that's much bigger than me. By pointing people to the gospel. And if I do that, then whether or not people remember me doesn't matter. Whether the name Joel Hawbaker is ever mentioned in a history book, not important. Doesn't matter to me. What does matter to me is when I die and I stand in front of my Savior, is he going to say to me, I never knew you? Or is he going to say, well done, good and faithful servant? If he says well done, there is nothing greater that I could ask for. That's it. And so that gives me the confidence, that gives me the courage to do things that a lot of people might not want to do. And one of those is simply admitting when I was wrong, because I would love to say that I've always done all of this perfectly. But that's not true. I mentioned earlier I have an ex-wife. I'm divorced and remarried. And I made a lot of mistakes in my first marriage. I've made a lot of mistakes throughout my life. So what that means is I have to have the courage to go and ask forgiveness from people that I have wronged. Because I'm not perfect. I'm a human being. I'm sinful. I'm going to make mistakes. I'm going to raise my voice when I shouldn't. I'm going to say mean things to people because I think it's funny and clever. And when I do that, I've broken a relationship or I've harmed a relationship. Well, that means I have to go back and fix it. And the only way I can do that is by humbling myself enough to say, I was being hurtful and I'm sorry and I hope you can forgive me. Now, I can't control how they respond. What I can do is to try to go back and fix things. And again, I think that makes a big impact on people. I can tell you from experience, apologizing to a class full of 14-year-old high school freshmen because I yelled at them when I shouldn't have, that's not fun. To admit I was wrong in front of a bunch of kids who already think they know more than I do, that's not fun. But it's still the right thing to do. And when I do that, it makes an impact on them because they realize that I'm human just like they are.
So let me ask you this. We evolve, right? We evolve all the time. Mm-hmm. So in the 10 years or 12 years that you've been teaching, have you seen the students that were in your first classes, have you seen them again and have you seen them become what you want them to become?
Yeah, it's really fun. I've seen some great transformations from students. And I heard someone mention this yesterday. It was actually, or a couple days ago, it was another person I was interviewing with, and he said that the teachers that had the biggest impact on him are the ones who treated him not like the student he was, but like the adult they hoped he would become. And I thought, oh man, that's so good. I wish I treated kids that way. Because a lot of times I'm guilty of treating the students like the students they are instead of the adults I hope they will be. And that's my mistake. So what that means is just like what you said, I need to be looking for the transformation. And I need to treat kids the way that I would treat them if they were already transformed. Because if I'm just rude to kids, what do I expect them to be back to me? They're going to be rude back to me because I taught them how to do that. And I'm very guilty of having been rude to kids in the past, even this past school year. And when I realized that, it's very humbling Again, I've been doing this for a decade. You'd think I would know now that if I treat kids well, they're better back to me. But I forget it every year. And again, this is where the wisdom of C.S. Lewis comes in. He tells us we need to be reminded of things a lot more often than we need to be taught.
That's true.
You know, we all learned the golden rule when we were a kid. Treat people the way you want to be treated. How often do we forget it? Yeah, we forget it every time we yell at somebody in traffic. That's how often we forget it.
Yeah, and the thing is, then we wouldn't have this segment where I'm finding people who are instilling value, right?
Absolutely.
Because then everybody would be perfect. And my father always, he was a smart man. He used to say, you know, this is why we have prayer, because that's why we have to remind it. And mothers remind their kids to wash their hands every day.
That's right.
Why do I have to tell you what to wash your hands every day?
That's right. You should know to wash your hands by now.
It's a given, but yet we forget. And, you know, kids, we forget and we have to yell at them. But that's what my father said. If you don't remind them, they will not get it. It's like prayer too, because you have to go do your prayers, go do this, you know. And so right? And so I think you are on the right path. But you know, maybe we have another interview in a few years, and then you can tell me about the transformation that you see in the students, because that's always something that I am looking for. And I tell you why, because I used to be a teacher. We've been here in this country almost 27 years.
Nice.
And so, you know, I used to be a teacher back home in the 90s. So I'm dating myself. So I received a few years ago, I received an email from, you know, this student who had been in my class. And she said, you know, I hated math. I didn't understand. And I used to give them examples of, you know, a housewife examples of you need 1 kilo of, you know, 1 kilo of potatoes, and this is how much it's going to be.
Right.
Do you buy if you needed 5, or how much money would you spend? You know, so math problems. So I made those problems up, and I used to we didn't have textbooks or anything. We were a growing school.
Okay.
And so things were hard in that time. But so we were, you know, we had to make up our own school addition, multiplication, and everything. And I used to have to give them examples on that. So just everyday stuff that came to mind was something that I did. And she sent me an email that was really amazing, because she said, you know, I hated math. I didn't understand why you made us calculate the potatoes and, you know, the whole stuff that you made us, you know, calculate. But today I am a CPA.
Wow.
Numbers. I work with numbers all my time. And every time I see kids or I see parents working on these things, I'm constantly reminded of you. And I tell people, I had a teacher, and I go into this spill about you. And, you know, it was amazing, because I'd never gone back home, and she found my email, and she, you know, so technology, she, you know, she did some research, and she found me. And it was very humbling to me. Yeah,
absolutely.
And I said, this was a kid that hated to do math. This really was a kid who, you know, I would give them bean counters and stuff, and she hated to do math. And today she's a CPA.
Yeah, that's awesome.
It blows me away. So the transformation, it would be something that I would be interested in watching.
Yeah, absolutely. And again, that's something I mentioned in my book is, as a teacher, we are, especially at the school I work at, I've got great administrators. They remind us all the time, we are seed planters. We are not going to see a lot of the results of the effort we put into children unless they come back and find us years later. And I've been blessed. I've got some that have, I used to have a file in my drawer of letters that students would write me. And I've got a couple that I carry around with me when I go to different speeches, just to have with me, because they're very encouraging. But just a couple weeks ago, I had lunch with a former student of mine. I taught him history, and I coached him on the soccer field, and he comes from a great family. And I really made a good connection with this kid. Well, guess what he does now? He's a history teacher in a high school, and he coaches soccer. And, you know, he lives in North Carolina, but he was in town visiting his dad for Father's Day, and we all got together and went out to lunch and watched a soccer game. And it was so much fun to hear him talk about coaching his soccer team and hear him talk about his students, because I remember him when he was not any older than my kid is now. And these days he's being that to other kids, you know. Outside of, or after my own father, the biggest male influence in my whole life was probably my high school soccer coach. He was my youth leader at church, and he was my coach. He is the reason I went to college where I did. He's the reason I played soccer at the same college he did. And he was one of the groomsmen in my wedding 4 years ago, because he has had a tremendous impact on my whole life. He's the reason I wanted to become a soccer coach. And so it's a lot of fun to get to tell stories about. His name's Eric McDaniel. He's a pastor in Tennessee. And it's fun to tell stories about Eric. It's also just fun to get together with him. I've seen him a couple times this summer, and it's fun to just get together with him and talk, because now my older daughter is the same age I was when I met him. It's been that long. You know, he's known me long enough to be 14 and now have a 14-year-old. So he's known me most of my life, and that's just, it's neat to share that impact that he's had on me, and me try to have that and pass that on to other people as well. You know, and everybody has that kind of story. Everybody could point to, you know, I would say probably 3 to 7 big people in their lives who have had that kind of impact on them. And so my challenge to people, one of the principles I talk about in my leadership is lead where you are. And that is to look around and ask yourself, who can you be making an impact on right now? Because leadership isn't about having a title or a certain position. You are a leader, period. Everybody is, because you're impacting the people. So the question is, what kind of impact are you having on the people you spend your time with? Yeah. Are you impacting them positively? Are you providing value? Are you helping them become better? Or are you impacting them negatively? Are you dragging them down? Are you making them into worse versions of themselves? And if we're honest with each other, I know it's true with me. I've been both at different times. Sometimes I've helped people become better. Sometimes I've been the bad apple that dragged people down. And my goal is to be the bad apple less often and to be the positive influence more often. You know, and I think that's true of all of us.
And thank you so much for this interview, because you have instilled so many values in me. I'm going to have to go look up the C.S. Lewis book that you mentioned.
Oh, please do. It's one of my favorites of all time. It's a short book. It's an easy read. It's wonderful.
Okay. And so, you know, I think people who are watching this are going to subscribe and like this channel. And I'm hoping,
Great.
You know, they can share this video as well, because I think as a teacher, you've just taught us a lot of valuable these things. And I think one of the things that we need to do is also follow by example. So if we are good to people, then they will be good to us, right?
Right. Absolutely.
And pass it forward.
Right. Absolutely. Yep. And the thing is, we sometimes we treat people well and they don't respond in kind at first. But if you are consistently good to people, it will soften them eventually. Yes. And that's the thing to remember, is if you're kind to someone and they're rude back to you, that doesn't mean you stop being kind. You keep being kind, you keep being loving, and eventually they'll start changing their attitude toward you. And again, C.S. Lewis talks about that as well. He says if we